You are listening to the Critical Mass Radio Show, Orange County's business talk show, focused on exploring topics of interest to CEOs who are leading middle market companies. With your host, Richard Franzi.
Welcome to this edition of Critical Mass Radio Show. I am your host, Richard Franzi, and this is podcast episode number 1041. Michael Barony is our guest today. The Orange County Bar Association not only provides a wide variety of programs for working professionals, but also helps to open opportunities. I've asked Michael to be here today because not only is he the president of the Orange County Bar Association, he dedicates his time to raising awareness for the mental welfare of attorneys and helping them find an outlet for stress. He joins us today to tell us more about his passion. Michael, welcome to the radio show.
Rick, thank you so much. Glad to be here.
It's awesome to have you here. As I told you before we went on the air that my son is a practicing attorney and my daughter-in-law, his wife, is an attorney as well. So many of those professional people in our in our family at least. But let's start with you. Can you share for our audience that's listening to us live here on octalkradio.net or maybe through the Facebook live stream, or maybe they're listening to us on iTunes or Stitcher or one of the podcasting services. But let's talk a little bit about you. Can you share a story about your professional path that'll help my audience to get to know you a little better?
Well, definitely. I've always been an in-house counsel. I've never worked at a law firm, so that's a bit of a rare distinction there. So I've always seen companies from the inside out. And, one story that always jumps out at me, I've worked at several different companies, so I can say this without it being linked to any company. But, I've learned along the way, you really have to get rid of bad seeds. People who are uncoachable, when you have the chance to. And I'll turn that to lawyers. A lot of business owners looking to hire attorneys. And my advice is really strong about if you don't like your lawyer for one reason or another, if you have a gut feeling that that's not a good fit, it's probably best to move on from that. I came into one company, I was looking to clean it up in all kinds of ways. And there was one attorney that I knew I was probably going to eventually, have to ask him to move on and cut ties with an outside litigator. And I ended up terminating him after I saw a lot of overbilling and fake receipts in the bills and things like that.
Oh, my goodness.
And he got very arrogant with me and said, I've been around a lot longer than you have been with this company. And I'll probably be with the company working for them after you're gone. And I said, no, I don't think you understand. I terminated you from representation for this company. And he said, well, it's defamatory because you must know about what's going on with my lawsuit. Well, what I didn't know is that he had been caught sexting court reporters and translators in mediation centers by pulling his pants down and sexting these pictures. And I thought, I should have listened to my gut instinct earlier before all that happened, because I've learned that when you get a bad feeling about outside representation, if you just don't like them as a person, if you don't feel comfortable communicating with your outside lawyer, it's best to move on to someone that you do feel good about.
We're talking with Michael Barony, and he is the Orange County Bar Association president. He's also a practicing attorney, and he's in-house legal counsel. Tell my audience just briefly, what is the typical day like for you what type of issues make it to the in-house legal counsel's desk?
Being in-house is fascinating because you deal with every kind of issue a company can possibly face. And of course, it depends on the kind of company you're with. I've been with giant manufacturers. I've been with internet infrastructure companies. I had a brief stint in investment banking in New York, and book publishers and magazine publishers, and now a large amusement park company, one of the world's premier companies in that area. And so you get to deal with everything from animal law. I may handle legal issues having to do with penguins or a killer whale or sharks, to, of course, lawsuits, because we're most litigious country, in the world, unfortunately.
You mean lawsuits from the public, maybe?
Exactly. I mean, you will get lawsuits no matter how well you run your business. That's a very sad fact, and it's a scary thing for business owners, obviously, particularly if you're smaller and you may not be able to absorb the impact of a couple frivolous lawsuits.
So you took me exactly where I was hoping we could go with that question, which was generally larger firms can afford an in-house counsel, and many times companies that listen to my show, a couple million to $100 million. Unfortunately, on occasion, they also need assistance. But as a professional, I'm not asking for any legal advice, but just from your experience, what areas should a business owner who doesn't have the benefit of a full-time in-house counsel, where should they be super careful or at least cautious and aware of the potential for legal action or some type of need for outside counsel?
Well, virtually every company has to deal with outside parties, vendors, contractors, et cetera, and sometimes it's staffing agencies, et cetera. I would highly, strongly urge business owners, when you're dealing with contracts, get legal representation, because the contracts really form the basis of your entire business operations. What's
Okay.
in those are either a legal shield or it's an open door to liability.
Uh-huh. So can I pick at that a little bit more?
Yes.
So it's my belief that anytime you sign something, you should really know what it is you've signed.
Absolutely. And the scary thing is, depending on what the laws are and depending how things are drafted, you may be a very smart person looking at it at a piece of paper and understanding the plain English language, but you may not understand certain ramifications, particularly in California, where we've got, the most liability-laden laws in the entire, country.
Mm-hmm. Well, I signed a new agreement with my new publisher, and I read through it, and I gave it to my attorney, and she read through it with a bunch of questions. Did you realize this is what they're suggesting by this line? I'm like, no. And some of the stuff I was comfortable with, but on just a couple small points, she was actually really helpful in just helping me suggest alternative language that would meet my expectations and hopefully theirs, and it did. So
that's an excellent example of how the attorney-client relationship should work.
Okay.
Because you absolutely want someone who's going to be able to communicate to you, hey, here are certain, warning flags throughout the contract. I'm saying here are things that should be mentioned that aren't, and then to communicate with you about what your situation is, what you care about, what type of risk you're willing to absorb or not, and how much you want to fight through certain provisions.
Right. So we're talking with Michael Barony. He is inside legal counsel, but we're having him on here because he's the 2017 OC Bar Association president. We have a few minutes left in this segment. I wanted to ask you about the Bar Association, if I could.
Thank you.
So specifically, what does the president of the Orange County Bar Association, what's your role, Mr. President?
Well, it's incredibly exciting, unbelievably rewarding, and you're basically the representative of 9,000 bar members, lawyers and judges, and lawyers who practice in every kind of imaginable area, lawyers who are from every kind of ethnic background, young, old, etc. And it's such an honor to serve because you're basically the figurehead for a year of the legal community. And we do a tremendous amount of volunteer work. There are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of hours that go into volunteering for the bar. Everybody who's on the board, for instance, everybody who runs a section, everybody who's on a committee, this is all volunteer time. And we have an incredible staff at the Orange County Bar, led by Trudy Lewandowski, who's kind of like a CEO of a company. Is how I look at her as a general counsel. That's how I see her.
Okay.
And so we cater to every area of law and educating attorneys for every possible type of issue and legal matter that you might ever see. But we also do a lot of matching of attorneys to clients who need them. Some of that's pro bono work. Other times it's just a legal referral system that we operate. But what's nice is that Orange County Bar really has a reputation across the nation of being, the absolute finest in its operations.
Oh, really?
We're not the absolute largest,
Right.
We're behind giant cities like New York, LA, et cetera. But we're known as a really premier entity in terms of operational excellence.
Why is that?
I think that's because the talent here is so enthusiastic in the pool of Orange County lawyers, for one, and the volunteer time that goes in. People are very passionate about giving back to the community in this community. I've never seen a community quite like Orange County in terms of that kind of charitable giving and wanting to do good for people. But it's also the quality of the staff of the Orange County Bar because, again, I go back to saying, I look at the bar like a company, and everything starts with your leadership
Right.
and trickles right on down as to who you select to hire. And we've got premier people in everything from IT and marketing and graphic design and our editor of our magazine. Just everyone who works at the bar is a top-tier person.
So how do you become the president of the Orange County Bar?
It's a fun, long run. And, typically, I would say you have to be around and volunteering in a lot of different areas for probably at least 10 years before you're well known enough and trusted enough to even vie for that kind of position. And we have nomination committees that kind of vet people so that we try to put up the best possible people who could represent the bar. And then you go through an election process. So I actually, won an election back in 2013.
Did you have competition?
I did, and everyone does. And it's very competitive. And, we all kind of campaign very gently, but we campaign basically by getting out there and showing our face at as many activities and events as we can, and working with all the affiliate bars. We have about 14 affiliate bars. Some of those are minority bars. Others are bars that focus on a certain type of law, like the federal bar.
Okay. And you said judges are also part of the association?
Yeah, judges are a core component. So, for instance, when I was sworn in as president in January, we call that Judges' Night, right? So we don't call it President's Night, because to us, it's really all about honoring the judiciary.
Okay.
And I can say, too, I've had lawsuits all across the country, all 50 states, and I've been to a lot of courtrooms. And Orange County, I'm not just saying this, is extremely impressive with the quality of the judiciary, the federal judges and the civil superior court judges as well.
Wow. Well, that is all information I had no idea about. Last question in this block, kind of keeping it with the bar. Is there I heard about Judges' Night. Are there fundraising events for when you're doing work pro bono or trying to help out organizations? Are there calendar events that the Bar Association kind of supports and advocates for? In other words, could non-attorneys look at this list and maybe find some organization times that they want to go to an event or something, or is it really restricted just to the community?
Yeah, the bars are really, the events are pretty much restricted towards attorneys attending certain events.
Okay.
But what we do is we do pull in a lot of outside talent for assistance with certain community outreach events. For instance, that can be open to families of attorneys and things like that. We do about 20 charitable community outreach events a year.
Okay.
And we have a very big gala every year. We call it the Wine Tasting Gala, and we had it at the Newport Beach Country Club this year. And
What time of the year is that?
That's usually around, we've switched it to August, so it's late August.
Okay.
And a very exciting event, because that's all driven towards raising charitable funds. This year, we raised about $145,000.
Wow.
And then that all gets put out through the Charitable Fund Committee, who then hands it out to charities all around Orange County.
So it sounds like to me that a lot of what the president is doing, what your role is really community relations and kind of getting the members to be active in a philanthropic way within the community as well.
That's a great way to put it, because when you're at the presidency, of course you want to lead with integrity and honor, but you also want to lead in a way that makes everyone feel inclusive, everyone included, and build the collegiality, but then do a tremendous amount of community outreach. And for me, I kind of took a new tack. I felt very strongly about law enforcement, so I got to know all the police chiefs and the sheriff and the DA's office, who I'd never met in all my years at the bar, and it was important to me that we at least created some relationships with them. Also reached out to a lot of the elected officials, because I wanted closer connections between our politicians and the bar, and anything we can do along those lines, whether you're helping immigrants who need legal help, or whether you're connecting to a police chief. I think it's all very valuable that the bars stay very closely connected.
Well, I'd like to continue this conversation, but our engineer is telling us it's time to take our very short break. So the loyal listeners out there, you know that we're going to be back in like 30 seconds, so you don't really have to go anywhere if you're listening to us live on octalkradio.net. And if you're listening to us as a podcast, you may want to hit that 30-second skip ahead, but it's really not necessary, because this is just a brief word from me about one of the products or services that I offer. We'll be right back.
Richard Franzi is the author of 2 popular business books for CEOs. His first book, Critical Mass, The 10 Explosive Powers of CEO Peer Groups, was the first book ever written on the secret value of CEO peer groups. His second book, now with newly updated information, is Critical Mass, The Power of CEO Guiding Principles. Richard's books contain powerful information to help CEOs running middle market companies gain valuable insight to improve their decision-making skills. Richard's books are available as paperbacks or Kindle versions from Amazon.com. To find them, type Richard Franzi in the search box.
Live radio here on octalkradio.net. You're listening to the Critical Mass Radio Show, and if you're listening to the podcast, you're going probably, what's he talking about? Because our editor, Crystal Nunley, will take out that little bit of dead air that we had when we came back from that break. All of our shows can be heard anytime on iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spreaker.com, several hundred former guest websites whose CEOs have appeared on our radio show. Since we started in 2009, we've reached several 100,000 listeners through our live stream, podcasts, and other channels. Simply type in Critical Mass Radio Show, those 4 words, in your favorite podcasting software, and like magic, you'll get our weekly shows. We do 2 to 4 shows a week. This is the first, if you're listening to us live, of 4 shows that we're going to do, and we're talking with the get this, the president of the Orange County Bar Association. We've been talking about the Bar Association and about Michael's background a little bit, Michael Barney. I wanted to ask you about the other initiatives that I know that you are personally very passionate about, human trafficking. Can you tell us about that and your other passion?
Yeah, thank you. So, every president has the chance to try to advance initiatives they care about that are good for the bar and good for the community. And for me, when I learned a couple years ago through my friend Susan at the DA's office about the human trafficking problem in Orange County, I was astounded because I would have thought, okay, maybe there's a handful of people that are actually being trafficked, and aren't most prostitutes on the street kind of doing it, willingly. And there's a mindset that a lot of us naturally have that if you don't see someone kind of chained down somewhere, you think they can run away. What you learn is that this is unfortunately a bit of an epicenter in the USA for human trafficking. Pimps can make more money in Orange County than anywhere else in the country, even more than LA, New York, etc. And the horror is that one pimp and one girl, he can force that girl to turn enough tricks that the pimp makes about $250,000 a year just off of that one girl. The average age of these victims is about 13.
Oh my God!
And a lot of them are runaways. A lot of them are actually driven in by pimps and people they know from other states. Some of them are foreigners, but a lot of people that I talk to assume that it's mostly probably foreigners coming here and doing it. It's actually only about 20%. Mostly these are U.S.-born kids, and they're getting
mostly females, I take it.
Mostly females. There are a few cases of boys, but overwhelmingly it's a female-driven thing, and it's not just the streets and seedy motels. We're finding a lot of people running high-end, kind of sex dens out of condos and houses in multi-million-dollar neighborhoods.
Wow. So what are you doing as far as in your role you're here today to raise awareness to this, but what kind of other activities are you as the president of the Bar Association trying to help bring awareness to this?
Right. So, and that's the great question, because it's a daunting task. When you look at this, you say, well, what on earth can we do? But to me, I look at the Orange County Bar and I said, there's a tremendous amount of talent and resources there. We should be able to marshal our forces and do something. So there was already a existing task force at the law enforcement level, but I created a task force at the bar led by I appointed chairs Jessica Springer and Jennifer Tennant, and we formed a task force of people who volunteer their time. And we basically have the means to say, what can we do? Now, you said awareness. That's the most crucial piece. So a lot of what I've been doing is going around to all the section meetings at the bar, giving pitches on human trafficking, first to create the awareness.
Right.
We have a great meeting coming up on Wednesday for attorneys at the court. And that's going to have a human trafficking survivor representing the DA's office, Judge Hernandez, who's in charge of juvenile courts. And the more we talk about this, what happens is the more we're driving volunteer time for people who want to help, and we're also driving volunteer goods, which are desperately needed by girls who are trying to get out of life and literally don't have anything of their own. The pimps own them, is how they teach them, and the pimps own everything that they may wear, use, etc. So a lot of the times when they're picked up by law enforcement, we're trying to get them out to shelters. They have nothing but a pair of socks on, their underwear, and maybe a T-shirt. And so by having necessities drives, that's been a very big help for the girls.
It sounds like it, because a couple of years ago we had the sheriff on and we were talking about a specific program to get early to keep prisoners from going back. And one of the things that she talked about was, if they don't have a support system after they get out, the only life they know is, and the social network that they have, pull them right back into the life of crime, which ends up getting them back into jail. And so it sounds like this case as well, especially for a person either from a different country or a different part of the country, you can get her out of there, but the chances of her going back are pretty great, because I'm sure the pimps know she's a valuable commodity, and if it's all she knows. So having that support network from the bar is probably really valuable.
You're so right. I mean, these kids, they're often brought up in very rough homes. They're often abused from a very young age.
Right.
In some cases, for instance, we even had an Egyptian girl who was smuggled into the U.S., kept inside an Irvine home, and made to function as a labor slave, for 16, 18 hours a day, eat the scraps out of the garbage that the family might give her. And she was eventually discovered by a kind of watchful neighbor and gotten out of there. But you're right that that's a person who needs help. They need a lot of support. They need time to wean themselves off that life and to become independent.
Right. That is It's a delicate balance, isn't it, Michael, between having neighbors who notice something that's odd and neighbors that are overly intrusive in that, though. So what advice have you seen from studying trafficking that the people that are listening who might live in Southern California could learn about how to kind of watch for someone that's in distress or under duress?
Rick, that's another great question, and this is one of the ones we focus on because, for instance, I certainly wouldn't have known a couple years ago what to look for.
Right.
And, you might drive by and see, for instance, a girl in, what looks like kind of prostitute attire, and you'd think, I've seen that in the past too, and I thought, oh gosh, it's so sad how kids are dressing these days. Now I look back at it and I say, was I witnessing a human trafficking victim?
Right.
Getting pulled into a house by a kind of rough-looking older woman. Very sadly, a lot of these girls are getting branded. So we're trying to work with hospitals, healthcare providers as well, to be on the lookout for girls who come in who don't look very healthy, who look kind of beaten up, well beyond their young years. And often they have things like barcodes put on them. They've often got the pimp's name and indications that the girl is owned by somebody else. And so when healthcare professionals see that now, they're starting to contact law enforcement. So that's a big first.
Wow, that seems almost unthinkable.
And especially in America, right?
Exactly. That another human in this country and in, like you said, Orange County. I could see it in L.A., even, some of the larger cities, but not this bedroom community we know as Orange County. So this is amazing work what you're doing. I have about 4 minutes left for you on this segment. Is there anything else that you're passionate about that you're doing work in or the bar is working in that you would like to raise the awareness of our listeners to?
Yes, thank you. So some years ago I noticed there were a lot of our members who have disabilities and illnesses and who really struggle, particularly if you're a solo practitioner. Your business can collapse, your whole life can collapse if you've got an illness and you can't work anymore. And I just was kind of heartbroken by some of these stories. And I thought, the bar does so much for so many people in the community, but we had nothing that focused on our actual attorney members. And so I formed Amicus Allo, and that's Latin for friend, support, and care. And it took off far greater than I ever thought it would.
Good.
What's happening is that it proved to me that there are a lot of silent suffering attorneys out there. And I was shocked by the statistics that came out this year by the American Bar Association. Attorneys have about 6 times the rate of suicide of the general population.
Whoa.
Far higher rates of depression, higher rates of divorce, about 3 times the rate of heart attacks of any other professional group, and about 30% higher in alcohol and substance abuse. And law students, shockingly, when they were recently polled, about 80% of them came back and they said they're already severely stressed about law school studies and their future career and how to pay off their debt.
That's a big one too, right? Carrying.
So I looked at this and I thought, my gosh, I appointed a real community outreach guru, Shirin Farutan, who's an attorney, called Jensen, and asked her to be in charge of this. And she's done a great job of working with me to say, we need to do something about attorney wellness, because attorneys put on this mask of being, kind of invincible and strong, and no one wants to see a weak lawyer.
Right.
But at the same time, there are a lot of us out there who are suffering silently. And at least among attorneys, we need to, I think, increase the civility and compassion amongst ourselves and find better outlets for work-life balance.
So if someone would like to learn about this initiative and the other things that you're doing as the president of the OC Bar, how do where would you suggest they go online?
Well, I would encourage, you don't have to be an attorney to look at the Orange County Bar website. I think that's very informative for a lot of people. We do have a page on Amicus Allo with some resources for people who are suffering all kinds of issues. But we do have a legal referral service as well if someone needs an attorney. But I would encourage people to look at the Orange County Bar website and look at some of the materials there, because I think it's highly applicable to a lot of people in business and people who need kinds of help. You may see all kinds of things on that website that trigger new thoughts and trigger areas where you realize you might need somebody's help.
Right. So I want to thank you for giving of your time today to talk not only about the organization that you're representing this year, but also the work that you're doing on behalf of the community. I've learned a number of things, Michael, in our conversation. Thanks for being a friend of the program, and welcome to the Critical Mass community.
Rick, it's a true honor to be on your show. Thanks so much.
This was awesome. And I'd also like to thank our engineer for today's show, none other than Paul Roberts. Our producers are Joan Park, Crystal Nunley, and Haley Stern. If you'd like to connect with me on social media, Twitter, I'm CEO Peer Groups. LinkedIn and YouTube, it's Richard Franzi, Franzi. Our Facebook page is the same as our website, Critical Mass for Business. Until our next show, which of those who are listening live on OC Talk Radio will be in about 7 minutes. If you're listening to us on iTunes or Stitcher, just wait for the next podcast. I hope all of your business decisions will move your company in a positive direction.
You have been listening to Critical Mass Radio Show Business Talk Show, focused on exploring topics of interest to CEOs who are leading middle market companies. With your host, Richard Franzi.